All right, so let's start working our calculations for step 3. And just like I had to do last chapter, I just don't have a big enough board to put everything on it at once. So we're just going to look through the first column in our table first, our sums of squares column. And I'm going to approach calculating this in the way we've talked about it. We're going to do the stage 1 calculations first and the stage 2 calculations second. So that means let's start with calculating our sums of squares between treatments. Again, this is the same formula as last week. The summation of our treatment totals squared divided by, where's my formula sheet? I forgot what to put down there for a second. That's right, little n minus grand total divided by the total number of scores. So we get all this stuff right out of the problem. All the stuff has already been given to us in there. We just need to go find it. So what this means is we have 3 treatment conditions, so there's 3 t values. The first treatment total is 5, and there are 5 scores in it. Oops. The second treatment total is 25. The third treatment total is 30. The grand total was 60. And the total number of scores in the study is 15. So remember these n's. How many scores are there in any treatment condition? How many scores are there in the whole study? So 5 squared over 5 plus 25 squared over 5 plus 30 squared over 5 minus 60 squared over 15. Again, what I highly recommend you do as we go through this, pause the video, do your math, then hit the play button and see if you come up with the same answer as me. We can't do math by democracy anymore, right? So here we go. When you do all of that, what you should find is that your sums of squares between treatments is 70 points. Again, make sure you do that math. Don't just take my word for it. You got to do it on your own when you're doing it for points, right? So make sure you can do that calculation. But it's exactly the same as last chapter. No difference there at all. Next up for us are sums of squares within treatments. And again, we know this is just the sums of squares for each group all added together. And again, the book gave us all of those values. Sums of squares for the first group was 8 points. Sums of squares for the second group was 22 points. Sums of squares for the last group was 10 points. So that's all we've got to do is add those 3 numbers together. 8 plus 22 plus 10. Again, pause if you want to take a second there to figure it out. The answer is 40. Now again, that tells us the same thing it told us last chapter, that the value for our sums of squares for the total study has to equal these 2 parts put together or something is wrong. So that's our formula for the sums of squares for the total study. Again, we've got all these values. All we've got to do is plug and play. So we know it tells us that the summation of all the raw scores for the entire study squared are 350 points. We would know square the scores, then add, right? Minus, and again, our G squared, our grand total was 60. Total number of scores is 15. Like I mentioned in the last chapter's videos, this capital G squared over capital M, that's in 3 formulas this week. Three formulas this week. So again, once you've calculated 60 squared divided by 15, it's good to make a note of that somewhere. That's 240 points in this case. So that you don't have to calculate it 3 times, just once will do. So again, calculate it, see what you get, but we're expecting an answer of 110 because that's what 70 and 40 put together are. And when you calculate it, you get, sure enough, 110. Right? So that's everything we would have done in stage 1 for this column. If we were doing this live in class where I have a bigger board, I would now move over to the degrees of freedom and do the stage 1 of those. But we can only do one column at a time at the moment, so let's finish this column off. So now remember, what we've done is we've taken the total amount of variance, we divided it into 2 categories, numerator and former denominator. Treatment effect with error and just plain old error. But now we're going to take this error and we're going to calculate the individual differences between subjects and subtract it out to see what's left. So that means we need to calculate our sums of squares between subjects. So this will be a new one for us. And again, that's the summation of person totals squared over the number of conditions they've gone through, minus, again, our g squared over capital N. So this one is the biggest pain in the butt of this particular chapter. We have 5 participants in this study. That means there are going to be 5 fractions here that all have to go together. The more people, the bigger pain in the butt this one is. So let's take a look at it here. Our sums of squares between subjects. Our first person total is 6, so it's 6 squared over 3. Our next one is a 9, 9 squared over 3. Our next one is 18, so it's 18 squared over 3. Our next one is a 12, 12 squared over 3. Our next one is a 15, so 15 squared over 3. And then minus, as usual, our 60 squared over 15. So I've kind of overlapped into the table a little bit there. So you can see it's just a number of calculations. The more calculations you got to make, the more opportunity for careless errors you're going to have. But it works just like the formula for between treatments, between subjects. We just have to take each fraction at a time. So 6 squared divided by 3 plus, 9 squares divided by 3 plus, so on and so forth. So again, I recommend you hit the pause button right now and get grinding on your calculator for those. Now, the only thing we can say for sure in predicting our answer is it's got to be less than 40 points. 40 is the total I'm now subdividing. I'm going to take that 40 points of error and break it into 2 smaller categories of error. So it's got to be less than 40. If you calculate this and hit equal, then your answer is 52. Well, 52 isn't part of 40. Something's wrong, right? So when you calculate all of that, you get 30 points. And then for our last empty cell here, I'm just going to continue down here. Our sums of squares for error is our sums of squares within treatments minus our sums of squares between subjects. Literally, this box minus this box equals that box. 40 minus 30, 10. So 10 plus 30 equals to 40, 40 plus 70 equals our 110. All our numbers are lining up. We're going to continue on these calculations in the next video. We'll go through our degrees of freedom and move on from there. So continuing step 3 next.